With a week and change to go until Halloween, I figured I should probably publish an episode at least tangentially related to the holiday. So, this episode is the recording of a presentation I gave at the Long Beach Comic Con in late August about the history of the mad scientist trope in pop culture. Now, getting to this presentation was quite the adventure. I had originally prepared the material for the Wild Wild West Con held in Tucson all the way back in March. And this is a steampunk convention whose theme for the year was Halloween. Already knowing the mad scientist debuted in the early 19th century, I figured the topic was perfect. So I pitched the idea and it was accepted. I put around 100 hours of research into the project, also including writing the script, crafting an interactive presentation customized for the steampunk audience, and making giveaways. I was very proud of the final product, even if I do say so myself. Now, my presentation time was noon on the Sunday of the convention, and I had planned to fly to Arizona Saturday evening. An hour before leaving for the airport, I visited the convention's Facebook page to see if there were any updates to the schedule. And much to my shock, I found out that the convention had been canceled just a few hours prior due to a norovirus outbreak. Even more, the venue, which was a casino and resort, kicked out everyone involved with the convention. Vendors were given just a couple of hours to completely tear down their booths and pack up. Attendees staying on site were given basically the same deadline to get everything out of their rooms and leave. Their room reservations were canceled and refunded. Had I not decided to open up Facebook that night, I would have shown up Sunday morning and have been very, very confused. Well, a few months later, the Long Beach Comic Con announced they were accepting panel proposals. And not wanting my hard work to go to waste, I pitched this presentation and they accepted. Of course, I now had to retool the look of the presentation and some of the material from a specifically steampunk vibe to a more generic comic book vibe. But I think it was well received by the couple of dozen people who attended. This is the STEM Sessions Podcast, episode 35. Mad Scientists, Harbingers of Doom, or Cultural Icons?
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So how's everybody doing tonight? Ready for dinner? Awesome. So my name's Cody Colborn, and I'm here to talk to you about the history of the mad scientist trope in our pop culture. Now, this is going to cover not just modern pop culture, but we're going to go all the way back to ancient Greece. We're going to talk about the medieval period because, let's face it, even mythology was pop culture at one time. So before we start, there are a few notes. There are going to be some PG-13 topics in here, nothing too graphic, just kind of your basic sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And perhaps more harrowing, there is a bit of audience participation. So at the beginning of each section, I'm going to show a movie quote, song lyrics, passage from a poem, something like that. And the first one to give me the source will win one of these cool buttons that I made to commemorate what will surely be a wonderful 45 minutes together. So let's go ahead and get started. And we'll start right off the bat with kind of an easy quote. Where does that come from? It's a movie quote.
Back to the Future?
Bingo, yes. Back to the Future, Marty McFly and Doc Brown. So I'm starting here because when I think of mad scientist in pop culture, I think of Dr. Emmett Brown. Now, why do I think that? Well, he's an older guy. He's got the crazy gray hair. He's got eccentric mannerisms. If you remembered his laboratory, it was all haphazard and messy, and he comes up with wacky theories and crazy experiments. But Doc Brown is just one example of a mad scientist in popular culture. I mean, if you look at a property or a house like DC Comics, I think they probably have a dozen or so characters that are based on the mad scientist trope. You have the OG Lex Luthor, Scarecrow, Poison Ivy, Dr. Ivo, Gorilla Grodd, just off the top of my head. And for the most part, today the mad scientist has become a bit one-dimensional. They don't receive a lot of character development. They're really just there for comic relief or to be a foil to the protagonist. But in its original form, the mad scientist was really a warning to society. It was a harbinger of bad things to come if you stayed on your current path. Now, there's near universal consensus in academia that the first mad scientist was Dr. Victor Frankenstein in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, published all the way back in 1818. But before we discuss the concerns specific to the late 18th century and early 19th century that really kind of birthed the trope, we need to look at some of the foundations that have been in our storytelling basically since we started telling stories around the campfire. And so that will lead us to our next quote. These are song lyrics. Can anybody tell me the band?
Back to the Future?
No. It would probably help if I sang them, but I'm not going to because I won't torture you. No, it was Iron Maiden, Quest for Fire. Okay, so we're going to go all the way back to Greece, about 2,600 years ago, 2,600 years before Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. A poet named Hesiod wrote Theogony, and Theogony was really a collection of oral traditions, a collection of stories that had basically just only been passed down generation to generation. It was the first time that a lot of these stories and myths were written down, and as far as we are aware, it was the first written account of the Prometheus myth. Oh, not that Prometheus. This one. So to just kind of give a quick overview of the Prometheus story, he was a Titan, one of the original deities in Greek mythology. And when Zeus decided to overthrow that older generation, Prometheus kind of sided with the kids. He helped Zeus win the family war, and thus he was not punished along with the rest of the Titans. In fact, he won a bit of favor and kind of found himself a place as the crazy uncle in the pantheon. Now, some versions of the myth claim that Prometheus created humans. Others just say he was kind of their biggest supporter among the gods. But while the rest of the pantheon really just kind of regarded humans as animals or just cattle, because he was Zeus's favorite uncle, they just kind of laughed off Prometheus's obsession with humanity. So Prometheus from up high watched the humans struggle to survive. They battled cold, they battled dangerous beasts, they battled starvation, and all the while the gods were just up on Mount Olympus partying, drinking, and being merry. So he hatched a plan. He decided to steal fire from Mount Olympus and deliver it to humanity. Now, practically speaking, giving them fire gave humans a source of warmth that allowed them to cook food. It helped ward off dangerous animals. It basically facilitated their survival. But metaphorically speaking, giving fires to humanity was basically giving us knowledge and technology. It gave us science and arts, civilization, and power. And this new sense of power really advanced humans as a species, and it brought them closer to parity with the gods on Mount Olympus. Now, because this was obviously not going to fly with the rest of the gods, Zeus decided to chain Prometheus to a cliff for all eternity, where every day an eagle would stop by and eat his liver, and every night the liver would regrow, and the next day the eagle would come back for a new meal. Now, stories of fire being stolen from gods and given to humanity is not unique to ancient Greece. It's really existed pretty much in every ancient culture. Samaria, Native America, just off the top of my head. And this kind of speaks to this innate fascination we have with forbidden knowledge in our collective cultures. And so while most people will stay away from forbidden knowledge because someone says it's forbidden, there are a few among us that just kind of instinctually seek it out despite the consequences to themselves or society. And it's this built-in need to obtain knowledge despite the consequences is really kind of the first foundation that will get us to the mad scientist in modern times. All right, next quiz. It's a passage from a poem. Can anybody tell me where it's from? Sure. It's from, yeah, it's found in the Poetic Edda, and it's Havamal, specifically stanzas 138 to 139. This particular translation was by Dr. Jackson Crawford, because obviously the original is in Old Icelandic, so I had to get an English translation. So we're going to move ahead from ancient Greece into the Viking Age of Scandinavia, and from that passage, one of the more prominent characters in the story is Odin. Not that Ian McShane character, this one. So Odin's the Allfather. He helps create Midgard, which is our world, by killing the first primordial being. He actually gives life to humans. He was also a student, a teacher, an observer, a drinker, a partier, a warlord, a poet. He's associated with bestowing values on humanity such as wisdom, death, knowledge, sorcery, insanity, medicine, and writing, which is already kind of sounding a bit mad scientist-y. Now, Odin, along with all the other gods, was prophesied to die at Ragnarok, under the paws or in the mouth of the wolf Fenrir, and he was desperate to avoid this fate, but he didn't know how. Now, you would think, being the Allfather, he would just kind of by default have enough knowledge to figure out how to escape his fate, but some knowledge was even forbidden to him. But he was certain if he could get that knowledge, he could figure out a way to not die. So he decided to go to the three entities in Norse mythology that are responsible for creating everybody's fate. These entities are called Norns, and they live or reside at the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree. And what they do is they carve everybody's fates in runes in the branches of Yggdrasil, and then Yggdrasil sends out those fates to the appropriate recipient via their roots that go through the 9 realms. Now, the runes, Odin believed that if he could master the runes, he would have the knowledge to escape his fate. But the runes only reveal themselves to those proven worthy of their power. So he hung himself from a branch of Yggdrasil, pierced himself with a spear, and forbade anyone from helping him. He hung there for 9 days and 9 nights, peering into the shadowy waters of the well below. And at last the runes said, okay, yeah, you're cool, and accepted his sacrifice and appeared to him in the water. Now, with the power of runes, Odin learned chants to heal wounds. He could extinguish fires, combat malevolent magic. He could wake the dead, protect his allies in battle, bind his enemies. He became one of the strongest and most feared entities in the cosmos. And all it cost him was 9 days and nights of self-torture. Now, in the Viking Age, runes were first and foremost an alphabet. Much of the mysticism assigned to runes in modern paganism is really just it's only a couple of hundred years old. It definitely does not go all the way back to the Viking Age. But being able to read and write in an almost completely illiterate society was seen as great power, and that's why this part of Odin's story carries so much weight. But his quest for knowledge didn't stop there, because also amongst the roots of Yggdrasil lived a mysterious being called Mimir, who had unparalleled knowledge of basically everything. And he gained this knowledge by drinking from the well of Urd, which is the same well that produced the runes. So Odin went down there and asked Mimir if he could have a drink of the well's water too, because he wanted the knowledge also. And Mimir, kind of being selfish and not wanting to share that power, was like, nah, man, that's cool. But Odin, persisted, and Mimir said, okay, you can have a drink, but you got to give me your eye. Thinking it's so outrageous, no one's going to go for that deal. But without hesitation, Odin gouged out his eye, flung it into the well, and Mimir was like, yeah, okay, knock yourself out. And Odin got his drink of the well water. So by sacrificing his eye, Odin exchanged an earthly, everyday mode of perception for a more powerful mode of perception, one backed by ancestral and cosmic wisdom, pretty much making him the top dog in all of the cosmos. So through Odin, we kind of find ourselves with a second foundation of the mad scientist, or what will become the mad scientist, and that's obsession and sacrifice to gain the forbidden knowledge, but also kind of wisdom beyond any mortal or divine being. So you're really kind of now branching out just well beyond just kind of your everyday knowledge like fire, and you're going bigger and badder. Okay, next up, we got another movie quote. Best movie of all time. Surely someone knows this. Or maybe I'm just old. I don't know. Okay, it's from Tombstone, when the cowboys are watching the play Faust. Yeah. So now we're going to move ahead from medieval Scandinavia into the Renaissance period of Europe, specifically Germany, and to the legend of Johann Georg Faustus. Now, Faustus was a real person. He was an eccentric alchemist, magician, and astrologer living in Germany in the late 1400s to early 1500s. Many, many decades later, a couple authors would fictionalize his life, the first being Christopher Marlowe in The Tragical History of the Life and Death of Dr. Faustus, and by Johann Wolfgang van Goethe in Faust. And that's just a scene from the play they were watching. So in the stories, the character Faust, again, we're now talking about the character, not the real historical person. He's a scholar. And after devoting his life to scholarly pursuits, he's just unsatisfied with himself. Logic, theology, nature, i.e. book learning, just no longer excited him. And so naturally, where do you turn when life no longer excites you? You turn to black magic and the devil to get your fix. So he signs a contract with a lower demon named Mephistopheles, and this agreement was that for the remainder of Faust's life, Mephistopheles would give him just unending joy and happiness, knowledge and experiences beyond all of his desires, all for the low, low price of his soul. But they also added a stipulation that said the contract would be null and void if Mephistopheles failed to satisfy Faust or get him to want one of his presents to last forever. And Faust was so certain that he would be bored forever that he was going to come out of this deal with his soul intact. Now, there are a lot of shenanigans that get packed into these stories. They include tricking popes and other religious leaders, conjuring historical figures like Alexander the Great, mythologic figures like Medusa, and so on and so on. And after all of this, Faust is left satisfied, and Mephistopheles takes his soul to hell. But amongst all the craziness, there is some subtext that's we're interested in for this talk. And that's the subtext reflecting the evolving opinions of knowledge and academic advancement in the Renaissance period. Those are shown through Wagner, who is Faust's student, kind of like a Renaissance version of a TA or a lab assistant. He represents the pure intellectual pursuits of the Age of Enlightenment. He believes that all you need is logic, reason, and observation to advance society and fulfill its needs. Descriptions of his laboratory even kind of prove this out, where everything is like state-of-the-art, perfectly ordered, which are really exemplifying the Age of Enlightenment's success. So while Wagner is respectable, he's a respectable scholar, Faust is not. He has a thirst for power, and book learning and reason are just no longer sufficient means of getting it. So he, as we talked about, turns to mysticism and firsthand experiences as new tools. And these are tools that really no serious academic at the time would use. In fact, only the mad ones would have the ego to try to be better than academia. So that brings us to one of the third and final kind of foundation of what will become the mad scientist, and that is hubris, or the ego to thinking that you can game the system when you gain this knowledge, and when you're pushing the boundaries of what society and academia deems appropriate. All right, next up. What movie is this quote from? Who said it?
Frankenstein?
Well,
The full name, whatever it is? Oh.
well, it's a movie. It's Young Frankenstein. Young Frankenstein, yes. Yes, Frankenstein, yes. Yes, Igor. All right, so now we've come all the way back to 1818 with the release of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and this is a copy of one of the original covers. So for anyone who doesn't know the story, here's the Cliff Notes. Dr. Frankenstein employed modern science and technology to create life. He used science to do things that were against societal standards, things deemed unnatural. That new life form turns on him, and the reader learns a lesson. That's pretty much that's the gist of it. So Dr. Frankenstein exhibits the three pillars we've discussed. He uses forbidden knowledge. He's obsessed with his task, and he has the ego to believe that he can defy the natural order of things. So why is he the first mad scientist and not one of the other characters that we've talked about? And it's really because he's the first to combine all those pillars with being an actual scientist doing actual science. And that may sound pedantic, but it's actually very important to the late 18th century and early 19th century. So before that time, the terms science and scientist weren't really used, at least not in their modern definitions. Science was commonly referred to as natural philosophy, and therefore the people thinking about natural philosophy were natural philosophers. They had mathematicians, astronomers, chemists to a degree, even engineers, but everybody else was really a natural philosopher. Natural philosophers spent their time trying to figure out why the world around them worked as it did. And for them, divine action was just as appropriate a response or answer as physics was. But in the late 1700s, we started asking a new question. We asked, how can we replicate and do better than nature? So once we started asking the question that way, natural philosophers became scientists with this more experimental approach to expanding our knowledge. And that was the start of extremely rapid development and change. We had the Industrial Revolution, steam power, machine tools, chemicals, mining, railroads, factories. Society was quickly urbanizing, the population skyrocketed, and we left behind our simple ways and we left behind nature. And the environment itself was now looking bleak and dirty, all the same things that we're talking about today. And this could all be blamed on those pesky scientists who were taking us in new and scary directions. And one of the areas in the one of the topics of scientific advancement in the early 1800s was evolution. And one theory in particular greatly contributed to the fears of science gone mad. French zoologist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck proposed evolution by inheritance of acquired characteristics. Now, the classic example is shown here, where you have a giraffe. It stretches its neck to eat grass. That new elongated neck is passed to its kids. They stretch their neck even more, and so on and so on and so on. And that's how you end up with giraffes with long necks. But when crudely applied to scientists, as the Victorian gossipers were prone to do, Lamarckism theorized that scientists were getting smarter because they used their brains more. And thus their children were going to be even smarter and use their brains more. And their brains would get bigger and smarter, even at the expense of the rest of the body, which would waste away, leaving them just this giant head brain thing. They also feared that the brains would become so smart that they would lack the ability to understand ethics and philosophy and morals. In fact, if you go back and read a lot of psychological papers from the Victorian times, there are many that said genius was an actual disorder, and that the average man was the evolutionary ideal. And then again, scientists clearly didn't do themselves any favor when it came to public opinion, because the 1800s saw the growing use of dead bodies in medicine. Autopsies and postmortem experimentation were very valuable to science, but they tested the Victorian standards of decency, and certainly digging up dead bodies that were still fresh was pretty ghoulish, according to everybody. So science was rapidly changing the world's physical, economic, and societal landscapes, and this scared people. And when people are scared, they need a boogeyman to embody that fear. Thus, the mad scientist was born. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some real-world mad scientists. We're leaving we're leaving fiction behind, and we're going to start talking about some real people. Okay, where are these song lyrics from? He recently passed away. There you go, Ozzy Osbourne, Mr. Crowley. Okay. Very good. Yes, we can all sing it later at the end. Okay, so like I said, we're going to talk about some historical figures and decide if they're mad scientists. Now, because I want to keep this lighthearted, we're going to stay away from. We're going to talk about actual mad scientists and not evil and amoral ones. So I'm staying away from anybody who conducted wartime experiments or peacetime experiments sanctioned by governments or other intelligence agencies. There's some really messed up stuff out there, and if you want a dark rabbit hole to explore, just Google real-world mad scientist and knock yourselves out. So we've already established that a mad scientist needs to be an actual scientist doing actual science. So that basically eliminates anybody before the late 1700s. So that rules out famous names of the Renaissance like Da Vinci, Brahe, Galileo. Da Vinci was a prolific polymath, and Galileo and Brahe were both obsessive astronomers, with Galileo also dabbling a little bit in physics. Brahe and Galileo were participants in what we call the scientific revolution, which was a proactive shift in how we answered questions. We moved from the pure deductive logic to an inductive empirical approach to answering our questions. It was really the beginnings of our modern scientific method. But even then, these guys were still natural philosophers. They were not scientists, which is kind of a shame because if he was a scientist, Tycho Brahe would definitely be a mad one. I mean, the dude had a fake silver nose because he lost his nose early in life, and he also had a pet elk that would just follow him along and eventually fell down the stairs and died because he was drunk. So, like, party on, man. So we really need to look at modern scientists. So how about this guy here? So he's clearly where the mad scientist look was taken from. I mean, there are a lot of papers that really all trace back to him, the messy hair, et cetera, et cetera. And he was absolutely obsessive. He was oftentimes very singularly minded on his task at kind of the expense of hygiene and friendships and family and everything like that. But he wasn't mad. I mean, he was quite the opposite. He was actually incredibly rational. He didn't like making any jumps in logic that he couldn't mathematically explain. He didn't do anything crazy to prove his theories. In fact, he went out of his way to get reputable experimentalists to try and set up experiments to prove his theories correct. So while he may look the part, he definitely was not a mad scientist. So let's go even to more modern times. And what about these clowns? I mean characters. So we got Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs. They're not scientists. They're barely scientist adjacent. And although they do have the God complex that a lot of the good mad scientists should have, but I wouldn't call them mad. They're just dicks, so we won't count them. So there are really two historical scientists that I think would be mad scientists when looked at analytically. First up is Nikola Tesla. So he's born in Croatia in 1856. So he's definitely a modern scientist by the modern definition. He was a pioneer in the field of electromagnetism, self-taught for the most part, which is pretty cool. No formal education, no university degree. He had over 300 patents worldwide, 126 of which were original patents, meaning they were not derived or expanding upon an earlier patent. They were his own brand new original ideas. And those patents include basically every foundational part of alternating current technology, which everybody's power grid is based on. His patents also included induction motors, which is his actual induction motor seen here, high voltage transformers, i.e. Tesla coils, remote control, and even bladeless turbines. He worked for both Edison and Westinghouse, the latter of which he licensed all of his AC patents to, and it made him very, very wealthy. With that fortune, he opened several labs in Manhattan where he worked on practical hardware and experiments like transformers, generators, and X-rays. He also used that money to set up a field station in Colorado Springs, and that's where Tesla, the mad scientist, really entered the history books. Colorado Springs was all about chasing wireless power transmission, which even today is as mad as it was back then. In addition to his own funds that he got by selling his patents to Westinghouse, he milked an investor or two to build a Tesla coil operating in the megavolts range, which for back then, megavolts was huge. I mean, we're up in the gigavolts and even beyond now, but megavolts was huge. This thing discharged lightning up to 135 feet away, and we're not talking lightning in the poetic sense. We're talking, actual lightning, like an arc flash strong enough to compress the air and generate thunder. Like this thing was ridiculous. Observations from these experiments led him to conclude that he could use parts of the entire planet to transmit electrical energy, which, as I said, again, is proven very impractical then, and it's proven even more impractical now. He also received numerous radio signals, which he was convinced came from other planets. But then he eventually returned to New York, where he milked money out of some more investors, including J.P. Morgan, and built the mother of all mad scientists labs at Wardenclyffe, which was in New England. And there it is. So this tower shown here is 187 feet tall, and he built it in order to use the vibrations of the Earth to transmit power and signals. No, not surprising, Wardenclyffe was eventually proven to be unsuccessful, and the property was sold to repay all the people that he milked money from. From then on, Tesla would basically live in a hotel for a year or two, skip out on the bill, move to another hotel, and repeat the process. This continued for about 3 decades until Westinghouse gave him a monthly stipend just to kind of like tinker around in the lab. It was basically just kind of a pity stipend to keep him from being destitute. The consulting fee allowed him to work on a cosmic ray fueled motor, new forms of energy that had never been seen before, and his infamous death ray. In 1943, he died of a heart attack. So our second mad scientist is the person who I believe I would be most like if I were to become a mad scientist, and that is Jack Parsons. So Jack Parsons was born in Los Angeles in 1914 and raised in Pasadena. He was a bit of a loner in his early years, spent most of his time reading, and his favorite subjects were mythology and science fiction. At 14, he began experimenting with rockets, creating his own fuel recipes, such as using gunpowder, commercially available fireworks, and eventually moving on to other metals and binders and accelerants. He conducted his experiments in his school's restrooms, his backyard, and of course, the Arroyo Seco in Pasadena. Now, during the Depression, he worked for the Hercules Powder Company, furthering his education of explosives and propellants, and basically acting as a source of material for his experiments. In 1934, at the age of 20, he founded the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory Rocket Research Group. And in 1936, they conducted their first experiment with a liquid fuel motor at Devil's Gate Dam in Arroyo Seco. 3 of the tests failed to ignite. The 4th basically made a flamethrower out of the oxygen line, but it was deemed successful enough that Caltech allowed them to bring the experiments onto campus. Thus, the Jet Propulsion Lab was founded. They became known as the suicide squad and attracted a lot of attention from local newspapers. In 1939, the U.S. Army funded them to conduct experiments in jet-assisted takeoff, or JATO. And these experiments, they began using solid fuel instead of liquid fuel, and found that it was a better application for rockets, which resulted in more funding, much of which went to fixing the damage they did to buildings on campus. Eventually, Caltech made them move back to Arroyo Seco, to the site where JPL would eventually find its permanent home. But rocketry wasn't Parsons' only passion. By 1939, he was a well-established member of the California chapter of Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templis Orientis. And that's him on the very far side with one of his many girlfriends. And that's actually a self-portrait, by the way. Yes. So here they practiced an occult philosophy focused on finding one's true will, a journey that requires a lot of drugs and sex magic. Parsons donated most of his JPL salary to the group and actively recruited new members from JPL. At OTO's recommendation, he engaged in sexual liaisons, cocaine, methamphetamines, and opiates. At age 30 in 1944, Parsons was booted from JPL, and his stock was sold because he was just too consumed by the OTO. His home in Pasadena, now called the Parsonage, became an occultist hub and rocket lab. He rented rooms to artists, musicians, anarchists, scientists, engineers, atheists, and eventually a science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard. The escapades of Parsons and Hubbard are quite fascinating, and included attempts at masturbating onto magical tablets to try to impregnate a woman across the country, and eventually concluded with Hubbard running away with $10,000 of Parsons' money and his girlfriend. The final years of Parsons' life was spent writing and experimenting. He wrote an autobiography, many occult texts, many essays, and quite a few technical manuals. In 1952, his home lab in Pasadena exploded, with Parsons suffering fatal wounds at 38 years old. Yeah, quite wonderful, huh? Yeah. Yes, it's a fitting way. So, okay, last quote. This should be an easy one. Exactly, SpongeBob. Okay, so what have we learned today? Well, we learned that the mad scientist trope started in the early 1800s as a response to growing concerns over science running amok and scientists playing God. But themes of forbidden knowledge, obsession to obtain it, and the belief that you can game the system with said knowledge goes back centuries, if not millennia. We also learned that there's a difference between mad and just being a dick. We learned that Nikola Tesla took financial advantage of plenty of people, despite the popular history painting him as a naive tinkerer. And most importantly, we learned that the founder of aerospace engineering, solid fuel rocketry, and JPL was a college dropout living a polyamorous lifestyle fueled by hard drugs and sex magic. Now, before I kind of open to any questions, if you'll allow me just a couple minutes of self-promotion, shameless self-promotion. My name's Cody MacLeod. I am the founder and lead organizer of a couple groups here centered in Long Beach. One's called the STEM Sessions. We do kind of crowdsourcing STEM education amongst adults. We have kind of monthly meetings where we get together and basically teach each other what we are fascinated by, what we have expertise in. We also do kind of STEM-related talks like this in non-traditional STEM settings. Over at SoCal Science Hikes, these are beginner-level hikes in the SoCal area that focus on learning about animals, plants, geology, astronomy, the weather, navigation. I'm typically the lead organizer on it. I have a few certifications in some naturalist programs, but I also line up expert docents to also guide hikes if there's a specific area we're going to. So you can find both of these on Meetup or pretty much any other social media, although I will warn you, my social media game is not strong at all, so Meetup is usually the best place. I also have plenty of buttons. If anybody wants some stickers and some postcards for these groups, you can pick those up on their way out. That said, thanks everybody for coming. Are there any questions? Yes?
Is there like a consistent answer on like which power order gave up? Left or right?
No. And what's even funnier is there's no consensus about which of the stories happened first. So the problem is we only have a handful of primary sources, and they're not even really that primary. They were written down in the 1200s, and the Viking Age was in about which is easily 200, maybe 300 years prior to that. And they were basically written down by people in Iceland who wanted to preserve those oral stories. So what we do know, we, the collective, the royal we, I guess, or the collective we, is that there are other poems and stories that were not written down, because you'll find this poem over here kind of refers to something that must have been a poem over here. So at one time there might have been a much fuller compendium of which came first. Did he spear himself first? Did he gouge out his eye first? But when the two stories are just read as is, they don't make mention of the other. So there's no timeline in it. And even if you look at if you just go Google search, I think there's predominantly images will predominantly show one eye, but then there's another 30% that show the other eye. So yeah, there's no doesn't seem to be a consensus on that. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Go have some dinner. Hopefully the heat has gone down a little bit, because it definitely was warm today. But thanks for attending.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the STEM Sessions Podcast, a podcast researched, written, and produced by Cody Colborn. This episode's music is titled Neolith and was composed by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons, and can be found at incompetech.com. The show notes and transcript can be found at thestemsessions.com, which is also the best place to provide feedback, corrections, and value for value support. Remember, doing your own critical research will always be to your benefit, and any pundit or scientist that tells you, hey, just trust me, bro, or scolds you for fact-checking and questioning isn't offering true education. So until the next one, keep learning.